Well, why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. I know this topic of offer and salary negotiation always gets people's attention because we know how important it is, and yet it's an ongoing skill to master and keep learning about. So I'm glad you're joining us. My name is Michelle Rapp. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Career Strategy in the Office of Alumni Relations, and I organize career programs such as this, oversee the networking platform Menu Source, and also offer some career coaching. I'm really excited to have Lily Awad here with us today. She and I have crossed paths in my career past doing MBA and graduate career services, and I know she has a lot to offer. She is a Senior Associate Director at Babson College's Graduate Center for Career Development, and she recently launched her own coaching and consulting practice at lilyawad.com. She is the creator of a career podcast series for grad students at Babson and has also published about the future of work in collaboration with ZDNet. Lily is really a Husky through and through. She's a double Husky with a BA in political science and international affairs and a doctorate in education focused on organizational leadership. She also worked at Northeastern in international study abroad study programs and international co-op. So we're really glad to hear your insights on this important topic. And Lily, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I am a Husky. Oh my gosh, I have so many amazing memories, both living as an undergrad student, pursuing my doctorate and working at Northeastern. So I'm super excited to be here and thank you for the invitation and welcome everyone. So today we're talking about job offer negotiations and really how to achieve your best outcome. So Michelle gave a really nice and thorough introduction. I'm not going to talk about all of this again, but I do love to present Clifton Strengths because that's one of my favorite assessments. I don't know if you're familiar with this tool. If you have an opportunity to take the Clifton Strengths, I highly recommend it. I've done mine recently, and my top 5 were input, strategic, responsibility, context, and discipline. And the reason I am introducing myself with my Clifton Strengths is because I do think that a lot of this is going to come out through the presentation, especially the input and the strategic being in my top 2. You'll have a copy of these slides afterwards, so feel free to connect with me. My LinkedIn profile is here, my Gmail account, the links to the podcast that I launched at Babson, which is not for a Babson only audience. I think some of you, if you're interested in these career development topics, would be really interested in some of the episodes, which is why I wanted to mention it. And in addition to my full-time job, I'm a full-time mom. So I decided what better way to introduce myself than to have a picture of 2 cute kids, or at least I think they're cute. So let's dive in here. So what are we going to cover today? I'm going to start with why a strategy is important. Again, going back to that top 2 strategy, and we'll break it down into a 3-step process, starting with a self-assessment, moving on to research, ending with your BATNA, and then going through some potential scenarios. I do leave some room for Q&A, but I love to have an interactive workshop. In fact, this is going to be interactive because I'm going to have you break out and do some individual work throughout, starting with that self-assessment piece. But as questions pop up, please feel free to ask them. And Michelle, if I don't see the hands raised or questions asked, please just feel free to interrupt me with those as they come through. All right, so why a negotiation strategy? Well, it's important to be prepared. You definitely do not want to be in a position where you're being offered something like a job and you're not prepared to answer it, right? So hopefully we'll talk about how to be prepared so that that doesn't happen to you. Statistics show that actually 60% of people do not negotiate their job offers. So you could be potentially leaving a lot of money on the table, or other aspects of an offer could be left untalked about, unpacked. So we want to make sure that we don't do that. It's important to be informed, so we'll cover that with our research piece. And by being both prepared and informed, you're less likely to lose the offer. Unfortunately, I have worked with a couple of students. Doesn't happen often, but I have worked with a couple of students who've lost the offer just because they didn't approach the negotiation process in a way that they should have. And this is directly related to my next point, which is maintaining that likability factor. So seeing this as, we both were in a position, me as the potential employee and you as the employer, in a position where we want that win-win outcome. So maintaining that likability and understanding that you haven't signed anything at this point. So the negotiation process is still part of the interview process. So you definitely want to, again, maintain that likability. When you do the research and you're doing the self-assessment piece, you're really understanding what matters to you. What are you prioritizing, and what do you want to see in your total compensation package? And it's important to understand the other side's constraints. So clear communication is really key to kind of uncover that. And again, that's really helpful in aiming for that win-win outcome. So just a minute to talk a little bit about confidence here, because it's hard. Like, this is kind of like the whole job search process can be a really emotional roller coaster. And the negotiation process is a hard one. It tends to be the hardest for the people that I work with to do. And confidence is an underlying factor for success here. It's a product of preparation. I have two motivational quotes here, one by Arthur Ashe, the second by Michelle Obama. One important key to success is self-confidence. An important key to self-confidence is preparation. That's Arthur Ashe's quote. Michelle Obama says, "Your success will be determined by your own confidence and fortitude." So I wanted to share 3 Ps to self-confidence here. These are my 3 Ps. One is the preparation. That's why we're here today. Hopefully you're going to feel more prepared coming out of this workshop. The second is to stay positive throughout this. Again, I mentioned can be a really emotional roller coaster, but staying positive throughout it can be really helpful. And the third is practice. So if anything, at the end of today, if you come out of this with feeling more prepared and one step closer to a tight strategy, I really want you to keep in mind that practice is so important. Even just practicing with yourself, pulling up your iPhone and recording yourself, doing a mock negotiation with yourself and watching it back, or having a friend help do a mock negotiation with you, or a career coach at your alma mater with Michelle. That could be really helpful. Okay, so let's dive in to the 3 steps for achieving your best outcome. It starts with the self-assessment. So step 1 is really uncovering what your key selling points are, which then informs your value proposition. I'm going to actually have you guys spend about 5 minutes, and I'll share more about what I want you to do, but 5 minutes here, really thinking about what those key selling points are. And I understand we probably have a mixed audience. Maybe some of you are not negotiating a job offer right now, but just thinking about this for the future. Maybe some of you are actually in the process of negotiating a job offer. But what I want you to do is really think about, what are my key strengths? What are the selling points? What are the qualities, the qualifications that I bring to the table? And how do they match the job description for the job maybe I'm currently negotiating with, or my target job? Maybe it's in the short future or the long-term future. If you're really struggling here with what those strengths or key selling points are, think about what your former boss or colleagues say are your greatest attributes. Do you have access to performance reviews where you could pull some of those key qualities out and add those to your list? How does your educational background fit into this overall strategy, especially for fresh graduates? Like, you just learned so much, it's still fresh in your mind. What are some interesting projects that you did in your throughout your degree program that you feel will add value to this role? Maybe you go back into the admissions page for the program that you completed and see how that degree was marketed. And use some of those key skills, some of those keywords in this. And if there are accomplishments and recognitions that you feel are relevant, then by all means add them to this list as well. So again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this. I would love some brave volunteers to share really just how this exercise felt. And I am going to employ some generative AI tools throughout this. So I'm going to use that here to help write a value proposition if someone is willing to share what these key selling points are. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'll check in halfway just to see if maybe you took less than the 5 minutes. So old-fashioned pen and paper, maybe you pull up a Word doc, but really just an inventory of skills and how you would sell yourself. Starting now. I think someone just called in. So if you just called in, we're just spending a few minutes here to jot down what you feel are your key selling points. And these should be skills and qualities you feel add value to your potential employer. Okay, I promise to check in halfway. Maybe that's too much time to do this, but what do you think, Michelle? Another minute?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. 1 more minute. All right. Okay, so this is just, I saw someone ask where to enter this. This is really just for yourself. So if you have a pen and paper, write this down. You could do it on your laptop, your computer. So do I have any volunteers who want to share, first of all, what that was like? Because this is hard. I feel like this is honestly one of the hardest parts of this process is thinking about yourself and your qualities. Was that hard for you? Does anyone want to talk about that? No hands
It's a
raised.
little tricky without having the specific job description in front of me to think generally about my strengths and selling points.
Yeah, yeah. It is hard if you don't have that. I do think it's important to have the job description to kind of make that match, especially for the value proposition piece, which I'll demo in a minute. But yeah, I agree. Anything else? So how did you do it?
I am actually applying for a specific job, so I pretended as if I was talking to that employer.
Okay, perfect. That is exactly how you should be doing it. I mean, there's no one way to do it, but that's a great way to do this. Do you want to share what some of those qualities were or those skills? You don't have to.
I can. Yeah, I was
Okay.
thinking about so I wrote down some of my selling points are that I am multilingual and I have a strong global background. I've lived and worked in multiple countries.
Mhm.
I'm an operations manager right now, so I'm good at seeing an issue and then finding the solution and seeing it through to completion.
Okay, perfect.
So it is kind of general, more abstract, not so concrete. So that was something I was thinking about is would it be helpful to be more specific, actually?
So I think it's a good starting point as you're thinking about these things, but I do agree that when you're actually in a job offer negotiation, you do want to be very specific about if there are, for example, operational tools or project management tools that you're familiar with that the job demands, then you definitely want to bring that up in your value proposition.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But it's a great starting point. Thanks for sharing, Alexa. Does anyone else want to share?
I actually just took the Clifton Strengths assessment a couple weeks ago. So because it was fresh in my mind, I felt like this was kind of easier for me to think about than it would have been if I had done it before. So I wrote, I've strong organization skills, effective communication. I pay close attention to detail. And my thinking is optimization oriented. So I'm thinking about how to improve something.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing, Sarah. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing the slide deck, and I'm going to pull up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with generative AI. How many of you use any of these LLMs? I kind of go between Chat GPT and Bard, but I've actually find myself going to Bard a lot more these days because it links to the source, which I really appreciate. So I'm gonna now do that. And let's see, new share. Okay. So you can see this? All right. Something to think about when you are prompting generative AI, and this is actually one of my favorite topics to teach workshops around, is being like a really good prompt engineer. And what I mean by that, I like to use this framework of being clear, explicit, so like explicitly asking the AI what you want it to do, and then adaptive with your prompt, because you might not get the immediate result that you want, and you kind of have to go back and make some adjustments. So I'm going to prompt it now with some of the key selling points that Alexa and Sarah shared, and ask it to write a value proposition for me. I am currently interviewing for a job, and I want to write a value proposition that aligns with the requirements. Here are my key strengths. And the nice thing is I can have these spelling mistakes and it still understands what I'm doing, but I'll change that. Oh, proposition doesn't have it as an option. Okay. I'm a strong communicator, multilingual, experience working globally. Love to solve problems. I think both of you kind of said that. And detail oriented. All right, let's see what it comes up with. That's great. Thank you. All right. So it tells us to focus on the specific needs of the role. So that again comes up. So analyze the job description and, oh, actually, let's see, use storytelling to bring your strength. So here are some examples of value propositions. So it writes a script here that focuses more on communication. It writes a script here on focuses more on the value of being multilingual. So I said that the prompt should be adaptive. And the way that I would probably adapt this is by maybe including some of the skills that come from that job description and say, you know, I really want to emphasize that I do possess these skills. How can we loop this in or integrate this into the value proposition? So this is a really great tool to kind of help ideate, innovate, get unstuck. I often say don't have the AI write it for you, but just help get started on it and maybe tweak and perfect some things along the way. And the value proposition is going to come up throughout your job search, right? It's going to come up while you're networking. It's going to come up during those screening calls, during the interviews, and it's going to come up again in the negotiation process. And when it comes up by that point, then yes, it does have to be very specific to the role and how you're going to add value given the skills that are in demand for that job. Okay, any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a value proposition and an elevator pitch in terms of how we construct it and how we would use it?
Yeah. I actually don't think there is much of a difference between an elevator pitch and a value proposition. Maybe the only one in this context would be that the value proposition is going to be a little bit more specific. Like your elevator pitch is good in general for like a networking event where you might not know who you're speaking to, and then you can kind of adjust it to get a little bit more specific to target your audience. So probably that would be the main difference between the two. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I see. Okay, cool. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure I didn't miss questions in the chat. All right. So then, oh yeah, go ahead, Elena.
Question. When it comes to, so there's different phases, right? We go to an interview and then we negotiate salaries or whatever. But at what point do you just continue like repeating your value proposition over and over just so that it sticks for them? Like, what do you think?
So, and you could be talking to different people during the process, by the way. For the purpose of job offer negotiations, and this is why we're just in step one now, you do want to make sure that you're articulating, here is why I deserve maybe more salary, or here is why I deserve to be working from home 4 days out of 5 days of the week. So it's tied to the ask. It's going to be tied to the ask, which we'll get to. Yeah. But thank you. That's a good question. So let's actually move on to the next piece of the self-assessment. And I'm actually going to give you just 1 minute to review this list of considerations and elements of an offer that you should be prioritizing. Again, with the understanding that some of you are maybe in the midst of this, some of you are thinking about this for the future, but these are typical elements of a job offer. Salary tends to be in that top, 3. It might not be your priority, and that's okay, but I want you to really sit down for a minute and think about this and maybe rank your top 10 with 1 being the most important. Some things that people are thinking about more these days is that commute. Do I want to commute into an office? Do I want to be hybrid? Do I want to have some interaction in person, or do I want to be 100% remote? So that's something to think about. Do I want potential for growth? Do I want to be in a company that really values professional development and offers opportunities for that? So I'm going to give you 1 minute to kind of just sit with this, And again, just rank, and you don't have to share. This is just for your own information. Okay. Are there any elements that are not listed here that you feel would be important to you? I would add independence and autonomy. I like that. That's great. Thank you. Stability. Mhm. Great. And maybe you get to the stability by asking questions around like retention rates and having some of those informational meetings with people internally. Reliable or good relationships with coworkers. Yep. Work schedule, absolutely. Coworkers, office, team structure, yeah. Which I think might even fall under the corporate culture. Kia, you have a question.
More so a comment. Maybe it falls kind of under the corporate culture, but what I would want to know is how other people who work there like it, how long they've been there, and getting the turnover. Because there's some places where there's like, seems like a great job, and then you're there, and then you start to see that it's not all as cracked up to be, or maybe it's just not a good fit, or the people who work there, even though it's a great job, great salary, you know, maybe you get to work from home a couple times a week or whatever, the people just suck, for lack of a better way of putting it. Maybe
Yeah.
it's just their personalities, or maybe it's just what they're driven for, competition or whatever. So I feel like that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah,
For me,
no,
at
that's a
least.
great point. It's wonderful. And I feel like in this day and age, you can find a lot of that information out. You can talk to people who maybe have previously worked at the company and recently left, because sometimes they're in a position to give a little bit more of a candid feedback on that piece. And it's interesting that you bring this up, Kid, because I was actually having this conversation with my team yesterday in light of Wayfair. Just, Wayfair's a big company. We all know the brand, they're local. And they do tend to hire a lot from Babson, actually. And they just went through a round of layoffs. Actually, the majority of the people that they have been laying off are remote workers, which is another interesting point we will get into. But the question someone asked was, do we promote these opportunities? Do we still bring Wayfair to campus? And I said, well, yeah, we can't really make that decision for students. We can inform them and provide them with resources to read up on the company culture and connect them to alumni who maybe work there and have worked there for that informational piece and really getting under the hood. But in this day and age, it's easier to get that information. So it's great that you're asking the questions. I think that's really an important aspect of it. Well, thank you. These are wonderful, and I'll actually add some of these to my list next time I run this workshop. So thank you for that. All right, so let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is research. I do spend a good chunk of this on salary just because, again, that tends to be the priority, like the one to two, three top priorities that I see from students and clients. So I'm going to spend some time on that piece, but to address a lot of what came up previously, I can't emphasize enough the power of informational meetings. So really having those conversations to uncover like professional development opportunities, and how does your team support growth? How does your manager support that? So those informational meetings are going to be key to uncover some of the other aspects of an offer. And there are articles written about company culture, like Forbes and the Boston Globe. I think they recently published something on Wayfair. LinkedIn has been publishing a lot on corporate culture and things that people say about a prior employer. So that could be really useful. Glassdoor has company reviews. I wouldn't take everything like as is and say, oh, this person was just so upset, and we know nothing about the context of why they even left the organization, right? So sometimes you really have to dig a little bit deeper than that, than the Glassdoor review. But let's spend some time doing a little bit of research here and focusing on salary, just so that you're familiar with some of these tools. And I'm going to do another Gen AI demo. I think, again, Bard is amazing for getting started on salary information. So I'm going to share my screen again. I'm sorry, my browser. You are on my screen. Okay. So I'm going to prompt Bard. I'm going to tell Bard that I'm actually going to ask Bard, what is the average salary for a mid-level product manager? Product management tends to be something I see a lot with MBAs. What is the average salary for a mid-level product manager for a tech company in Boston? Okay, see how specific I was? We can talk about the specificity of the prompt too, if anyone wants to. Okay, so it starts by telling me about the specific skills and the experience, which is helpful. All right, so here's some estimates based on recent data. ZipRecruiter, as of this January, 176, built in Boston, 120, and 138 total comps. Salary.com, really wide ranges here, right? So don't just use this. I would again look at this as kind of like a starting point. There's a really wide range here, and then I would go into some of the other resources that are listed on my slide to do a little bit more digging. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes, and I know some of you are not considering a different job right now, but maybe thinking about it. Maybe you're in a role that you really love and you just are here because you love to learn, and that's great too. So maybe you use your current job title to conduct this salary research. So I'm going to go back to my slide and have you use some of those resources to spend about 3 minutes here just to get familiar with this process. And you don't have to share what the salary was, but maybe we'll have a few minutes for an open discussion afterwards. How do you compensate for AI hallucinations? Yeah, well, AI is not perfect. So I definitely think it's important to not just use the AI. Again, I do think it's a nice starting point, but I would do that deeper dive and back that up with some of the other resources here. So thank you. Does a good job at sounding very confident, right? But sometimes is not what we're looking for. And then someone also mentioned check job postings for the role. Yep. So the salary range on the job posting, if applicable. And I see that Denver and California are now legally have to disclose a range. Yeah, that's great. Okay, John, that's a good question. We'll actually get there with some potential scenarios at the end. So hopefully you can sit through this. All right, so a couple more minutes so you could just play around with some of these tools and these websites. All right. Any comments, questions that came up while you used any of these websites? Is there another resource that you use that's not listed here? Can we directly ask the recruiter for the salary range offered without first disclosing our expectations? Darshak and John, similar questions. Yes, I do think that if salary is a priority for you and it doesn't come up in that screening call by the recruiter, because oftentimes it actually does, because they don't want to waste their time either, then I think it's okay to provide a range, as long as your range is grounded in, again, the research. So it's the market value and your value proposition. So salary calculators to know how your salary translates to another location. Yeah, I think the paycheckcity.com here is for that. So hopefully that helps with that. Nice to learn about new sites. Thank you. Yeah, those are good ones. All right. Okay, so that's the research piece. You'll have hopefully again a copy of these, and you can use these when you need them. Let's move on to step 3, just because I think we have 20 minutes here. All right, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with this term, BATNA, very business school term that's taught in negotiations courses and totally applicable here to job offer negotiations. The BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is the best course of action you have available if the current negotiation you're engaged in falls through and no agreement is reached. Why is it important to have it? Well, it helps build confidence. So we're going back to that confidence piece we talked about in the beginning. It's achievable and realistic, or at least it should be. And it helps you avoid bad agreements. So an example of a BATNA could be staying in your current job, accepting another offer, maybe starting your own business, or continuing the job hunt. If you have nothing to lose, you don't really need the job right away, or you just really are prioritizing, maybe it's mental health and you feel this is not going to be good for your mental health, maybe just continuing the job hunt is your BATNA. But it's really important to just ask yourself these questions, right, before you really jump into that final piece of the negotiation. Okay, so right now we've determined value, or we've at least started at that. Hopefully you'll spend a little bit more time on your own uncovering the key selling points in the value proposition. You'll be setting your criteria grounded in the data using the sources that we talked about, and you'll be understanding your BATNA when you spend a little bit more time reflecting on what that is. So once those 3 things are achieved, it's important to document this. So keep track of everything that you've kind of really learned about yourself and your priorities. Maybe it, again, is just simply in a Word doc and you're just documenting all of this and referring back to it when you need to throughout that negotiation process. And going back to that practice that, like I mentioned in the beginning, you've got a great community of people who want to help. So schedule a mock negotiation practice, maybe have a friend or a colleague or a family member do a mock negotiation with you. If anything, again, recording yourself on your iPhone could be really helpful. All right, let's talk about some potential scenarios. This will be pretty quick, but I think it'll also answer some of the questions that popped up in the chat. So these are real scenarios that I've worked with people on. So the first one is responding to an offer. You receive the call, we'd like to hire you. Before we move forward with the formal offer letter and benefits package, we need to know if you'll accept the offer. Okay, so this is like deer in the headlights, wait a minute, what? All right, so what do you do? First, as soon as you get any call of the sort, it's important to just listen carefully because the employer has started the negotiation process. Give yourself time to really pause and analyze what they're saying before you respond immediately, and you may ask clarifying questions throughout this. And that's okay. Clear communication, asking questions, it's all really important. Remember that likability. So maybe you were thrown off by something in the offer in the package. It wasn't what you were expecting. Don't get like huffy puffy about it, right? We're still part of this interview process. We want to get to a mutually agreed upon outcome. So maintaining that likability factor is going to be important. So I would thank them. I would ask them for time to consider the offer. If you do require more information to consider that offer, tell them I'll need more information, starting with maybe it's salary, maybe it's vacation days, whatever it is. And if more come to mind after you've hung up the phone with them, maybe you include that in a follow-up email. So once you have received all that information, think about the components of the offer. I do tend to believe that all factors should be negotiated together for a job offer negotiation, so there's not as much back and forth. And then so once you've thought about it, you have kind of a counter, then the next steps would be to request to discuss this. Before I move on to the next scenario, any questions, comments? I'll open the chat to see if anything popped up. Okay.
What is the typical timeline for when we should expect this negotiation to take place? Is it over a week, or is that too long? More than
Okay,
that?
it's not that clear. I think you're asking, sorry, when is the official timeline for when this should come up?
Oh, sorry if my audience is bad. How long would we have to respond typically?
Yeah, good question. It's a very company dependent. So sometimes they will actually be very clear when they're making the offer, like, and we need to know by Friday, or we need to know by next week. You can also ask, like, when is the deadline by which you need to hear back from me? I think it's actually really important to ask that question, so you know how much time you have to do the research and the additional thinking and, you know, compiling your strategy. So I typically advise, when I'm working with students and clients, I would advise them to ask for that deadline. If you're in a situation where you're expecting another offer, and so you're trying to buy time, you might even negotiate a longer deadline. And one way to do that would be, you know, I want to make the best decision. I want to make the most informed decision. I had a great experience interviewing with the team, and it seems like a really excellent opportunity. Can we prolong this or extend this deadline to like the following week? And then what I would do is circle back with the other company and let them know I have just received an offer. The deadline to get back to them is fairly tight. Again, being very clear in that communication. You could even tell them when that deadline is. I just wanted to follow up as I'm really interested in the opportunity with your company. So when can I expect to hear about next steps? So hopefully that answers your question. I recently heard someone recommend to negotiate via email instead of on the phone. Yeah, I actually was expecting this to come up today. That is more common these days, is negotiating via email. People want to have things that are documented, written, documentation of what they're asking for. It may be less room for error in term or miscommunication if it's via email. I have to admit, like I personally, I think it depends on your personal preference. I'm a little bit more old fashioned where I like to hear kind of the tone of the person to assess whether or not it's something that they can even consider, and just to see and hear how they're receiving the ask and the negotiation. So I think it depends on your preference. But you also have to be very careful with your email tone, right? So again, lean on like friends, lean on coaches, lean on whomever it is within your network. If you're sending an email, like I just want to double check, how does this sound? Like if you were to receive this, does this sound, you want to, again, maintain that likability, be very gracious in your communication. Okay, the second question, the second scenario is on salary expectations. So the first example is the employer immediately asking you, maybe it's during that screening call with HR, what salary range are you targeting? You could answer with, my salary requirements negotiable based on my experience, the job responsibilities, the total comp package, or I expect to earn a fair market value for someone in this field. Let's talk before we make that decision, basically. Or if you have a range, which came up in the chat earlier, it is okay to say, this is my range, because you're not wasting your time and you're not wasting their time. And this is actually where your BATNA is important. So if they were like, okay, well, we can't accommodate you, are you fine with that? Okay, move on to the next. If not, then I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't give them my range. Sometimes the employer might respond with, I don't have the budget for the salary you're requesting. Okay, can you give me a range for which you budgeted this role? Or I'm interested in the role and I feel I have what it takes to contribute to your team. So, let's move forward and maybe we can come to an agreement later on. Unless the range is like completely out of what they have budgeted, I think is probably the case here. So hopefully those scenarios with those potential scripts kind of helped you. What are some experiences you've had with this? Or what are some, I see there are some questions maybe in the chat, so I'll open that up, but feel free to share with the group, because I do feel that that can be really useful. It could be really helpful for us to hear what other people may have experienced. Yeah, Kia.
Hi, I live in New York City and I still work for the city of New York, but before I did entertain the idea of taking a job at a nonprofit. And I was very familiar with the people who work there. They were friends from a different, working on different out of work events and whatnot. So I knew them and I was very interested and I was highly recommended and I got to the last stage. And then when they finally gave me the salary offer, it wasn't what I wanted. So I went back and forth with them about it. And even when they raised it a little bit, it still wasn't going to be comparable to what I was getting paid in light of the benefits that I already had for the city of New York, which has really great benefits. So when I totaled in the benefits, transportation costs, as well as what I would have to have deducted for my health insurance, which becomes more important when you get older. When you're like 20 years old, it doesn't matter. But when you get a little older, you need to go to the doctor. You need to make sure things are working and why are things creaking. So for me, it was very important for me to make sure that I wasn't going to be shelling out about $400 or $500 every check to just have health insurance on top of everything else with transportation and whatnot. So when it was all said and done, I had to tell them that I couldn't take the position, and it was hard because it was a dream job. But I just knew like I couldn't roll back on like how I felt and the bills I had to pay and being able to eat lunch maybe once a week outside of my house. So that was a hard decision, but I made it and I'm glad I did, because otherwise I would have been in the position and I would have been a little bitter that I was in a position making so little money. And during the negotiations, they did say that they were currently in battles with their HR to make sure they post the salaries in the beginning so they don't go through this exhaustive process and waste time, because it's a process when you're onboarding people, and I've definitely done it before. And it is better when like a person comes in the door, they know this is the salary, these are the benefits, and no one's wasting anyone's time on that aspect. I mean, people always will ask for a little bit more, but if you know like where the ground floor is, it makes it a lot better and a lot easier.
I love this example, and thank you so much for sharing, Kia, because it sounds like you did all three things that we talked about today, where you understood your value and your passion for this line of work. You did the research to find out, and you did the prioritization also to know that salary was really important for you. And you had a BATNA, so you did end up walking away. So I think that's a great example. Thank you for sharing. And hopefully you can find some joy and fulfillment in doing something maybe like on a volunteer basis or other way to kind of
Oh yeah, this was years ago. This was like 2020, 21. So yeah.
thank you for
Thank you.
sharing. Yeah. And I do see some comments here about like how some states are implementing requirements for salary ranges on the job description, which is actually really great. And it is part of these equal pay legislation that's been happening over the course of like the past 5 to 7 years. Something that actually became illegal in Massachusetts some years ago, maybe 6 years now, was to ask for a salary history. Like I remember when I was a fresh Northeastern grad, that was a common question, was like, send me a document of their salary history. But that is now illegal in Massachusetts and probably some other states. To what extent should I mention the salaries of other roles I've seen listed either internally or externally to the employer? I think that that is important, Christian, because that's part of that market research when you're conducting that salary research. And when you're in the negotiation process, you want to make sure that you have the evidence to back up what you're asking for. So if you are finding that the salary is higher than what they're offering, you can say, but I've done some research and I see that for this industry in this location, for my years of work experience, the average tends to be this percentage higher. No salary was mentioned, those told words to the effect of. We're just reading some of these to see if I can answer some questions here. As flabbergasted, consider that the person they hired in there. Okay, Miyata, I don't know if you want to. Okay. So if I understand correctly, Miyata, you were offered a job at a community college, but no salary was mentioned on the job description. And so you went through the process of interviewing, getting the offer. You were told that it was really low, and then yeah. I mean, that's such a good example. Unfortunately, that happened to you, but it's a good example of how like you could go through this long drawn out process of interviewing and getting to this stage only to see that like the salary is so much lower than what you were expecting. So I do think it's important to have these conversations earlier on. So I guess one piece that we didn't talk about today is, when should salary come up? Well, it does oftentimes come up in that initial screening call. So if the recruiter is not bringing it up and you do, and it is a priority for you, by all means, I would say, I do have a salary range in mind and I want to know if you could share what you've budgeted for this role. So ask them first. And if they put it back on you and say, what are your salary expectations? Then again, you have to have like a solid range that is, again, grounded in that research that you've hopefully conducted before entering the call. Yeah, Michelle, often employers will make offers in middle to higher, so there's room for pay increases. It depends how badly they want you. I agree. I think that you should always just try. You should always try to negotiate. And these days, like, recruiting talent is hard. It's really hard to find the right people, the right fit. It's expensive. So I don't think that companies want to necessarily lowball, right? They want you to be happy. They want to give you a solid package so that you're happy and so that they can retain you. But there's room for negotiation in most cases, and you should absolutely at least try and do it very graciously. I'm going through credentialing with the Fed. They haven't said anything about the salary. I found the range on the OPM website. Are we able to negotiate salary after the offer is extended? Yeah, that is another time when salary comes up. Yeah, so if they make an offer and they should tell you what the salary is, then you can say, and maybe use some of the scripts that are here. Yeah, you could say, thank you. I'll, as soon as I get all the details for the offer, I'd like to get back to you and have a conversation. Always get the agreed upon offer in writing. Yeah, good point. Thank you, Michelle. I agree. All right, so these are great questions. I guess our takeaways for today are really just to understand, start with the step one of understanding your needs and your values. So we kind of got started on that with step one in the self-assessment piece, and hopefully you spend some more time on your own doing that, to articulate your value with a value proposition, which could change once you're in the actual negotiation process. Market research is key, and your sources are going to be the internet. So some of those vetted websites and networking. Have a BATNA, so understand what that is. Spend some time thinking about that. Generative AI can be helpful, but don't rely solely on it. It can be a really great starting point, as we demonstrated today. Clear communication about what your expectations are, and what the employer can do throughout this process is really important. Maintaining that likability factor and understanding that this is still part of the interview. And then finally, practicing. I'll leave you, and again, you'll have access to this. So with some helpful additional reading, if you want to look into some of these articles. And I think we have like a minute or so left for questions.
Got two raised hands. Elena was first.
Elena.
Hi, I was just typing away in the chat. Really love the presentation, Lily. Thank you so much. So I'm thinking about changing careers, and I am thinking of taking a low, entry-level position. What do you think about potentially going in there with like, hey, I'm willing to take a pay cut? This is kind of like the opposite of everything we did today. So it's a little bit unpopular, but what are your thoughts, and kind of making myself stand out that way?
I probably wouldn't start with that. So I would think about what are some of the relevant transferable skills you have? Because oftentimes when people are making a career change, they do have to start at an entry level. And I think that's understood. So for you, I think your focus would really be like, okay, working on that value proposition. What are some of the transferable skills, or maybe some of the passion projects you're pursuing that are relevant? And how to make that transition, and on your resume, on your LinkedIn profile, and then really focusing on the networking to get your foot in the door. The fact that you're comfortable with the fact that you probably will be making less is good. It's good for you to know. You don't have to bring that up.
Thank you.
And Shaylee.
Yeah, actually, I also had a similar question with Yelena. I'm changing careers. I had experience in software testing for around 5 years, and then I did my master's in engineering management to get into an entry-level role in project management or product management. And I recently did an information.
Oh no, I think we lost Shaylee. And I know that we're at 1, Michelle, but feel free to send Shaylee my email address, and I'm happy to answer her question. And I wanted to thank you all for this opportunity, and especially Michelle. Love coming back to Northeastern in this capacity, and I hope to hear from everyone.
Thank you so much, Lily. It's a lot to cover in an hour. It's up. Do you want to take one more question, Natai?
Yeah. Where is it in the chat?
He's raised his hand, or I think.
Okay, sorry that I
Lily.
didn't see that. Hi.
So I also had like a very similar question. I'm an international student who's looking to get into. I'm applying for full-time roles right now, and salary is for me, given the current job market, salary is like it's not the most like topmost priority. I'm looking for entry-level roles and other stuff because I want to keep my options open, and I don't want to like limit myself to like just a few specific roles. So given this situation, how would you like what would you suggest? How would you approach this situation? And how, like, even if it's like taking a pay cut, like or how would I navigate through the situation and settle for a lesser pay cut or something like that?
Okay. So I think this is a slightly different topic where you're thinking about international student or international worker job search strategy in the US.
Right.
Which I love that topic. I work with a lot of international students. Again, as I had mentioned to Yelena, I wouldn't necessarily start with the fact that you're comfortable with a salary decrease. The biggest challenge for an international student or an international worker, and I don't know if this is your case, is going to be that work sponsorship, right? So I would leverage some of the resources you have on campus to uncover opportunities that sponsor H-1B visas, or other people who did it, who have a similar background as an international student, maybe from your home country, who landed here in the industry that you're targeting, to learn some job search techniques through them. But I don't think this is necessarily, it's important to know what your BATNA is in this case for sure. And it's important to know what your value proposition is. But if you're kind of like the salary is not important and some of these other aspects of a total comp package are not as important because your priority is to stay in the US, then you really have to find opportunities that are going to sponsor.
Right.
And more often than not, I think that those, again, happen through that networking activity.
Right. So compromising on the salary, will it be detrimental in the long term, or how does it affect you as an international student?
Yeah, well, I don't know that you necessarily have to compromise on the salary, because it's, first of all, it's not even legal. If a company is going to offer to sponsor someone, they have to also offer the same salary that they'd be offering a domestic candidate.
Right. And when is a good time to bring the sponsorship aspect of the job?
As soon as possible.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I've had, unfortunately, students who have gone through the whole process where they had the offer, they were ready to sign the paper, and then at the very last hour, the company was like, wait, you require sponsorship? We can't do that. And it was tragic for the student and a waste of time for the company. And you just don't want to find yourself in that position.
Right. And what if I am willing to pay for the sponsorship, like how
Yeah,
will that
I would check Department of Labor, the Department of Labor's website to see if you're actually like legally able to do that. At the very least, I'd be well equipped around that process. You can communicate it and kind of help the employer along the way.
Right, because I've had this experience of getting rejected because of the sponsorship aspect. So what I'm thinking is, so let's say if they're not willing to sponsor, will it be okay if I tell them that I'm willing to pay for the sponsorship? Like when is a good time to bring that up?
Honestly, I'm not an immigration attorney, so I don't want to give you bad advice here. I'm not 100% sure it's legal for you as the employee to pay for the H-1B sponsorship. You might be able to say something like, would it make a difference if I'm willing to take a reduced salary to cover the legal fees? But that's maybe to the extent of it. Again, I don't want to give bad legal advice, because even that might not be legal. So I would definitely check out the Department of Labor, the USCIS website. And if you have access to an immigration attorney, are you a current student?
No, I graduated.
Okay. So I don't know if you still have access to like any of the ISSS, the ISSI resources. If you can visit campus to go to any of those immigration attorney talks, I'd see if you could do that.
Right, sure.
I know we're at the end of time. I guess Shaylee came back.
Oh yeah.
You want to?
Thank you, Lily.
I have a minute.
Okay. 2 minutes, so embarrassing. I don't want to take a lot of your time. If you're still okay, then I'll like continue talking about my experience.
Yeah.
So,
that's okay. Go ahead.
Right. So after the informational interview, it really went well. The manager approached to the hiring manager to schedule an interview for me. And then the very next day, I got the mail from hiring manager. And the first round of interview was with the hiring manager. So, and that was a little surprising because generally HR interview comes at the end after all the interview rounds with the team. Generally, I felt that. And in that, in the part of salary negotiation, I asked them their range, and I already researched about that, and in the site they had written 72,205, and he told that their range is around 80 to 85. I was That was a new thing for me, because I was expecting to say around 90,000 plus, because I coming from the background, similar background, and having the transferable skills into the role, which is a different role again. Maybe that would be an entry level sort of role, but I had transferable skills from that, from being a software testing and software engineer to business system analyst. And then after he said his range, then after that I said, oh, I looked up on the site and it said 70 to 105. I was expecting around 90 or something, and then I gave my reasons why. Because the job is going to be in LA. I have around 5 to 6 years of experience. The cost of living is high over there, and I guess my skills are like I have the skills for the job written given in the job description, all of it. So after that, he said, yeah, but for your skills and for your background, we will only be able to offer 80 to 85, and the rest of the things we can like discuss. The final paycheck will be deciding based on your next rounds of interviews. So that was over. And then he said that, yeah, you will be getting next rounds of interviews in January. And I figured that he wasn't really sure about my background. And he said that, yeah, so you are from computer science, right? I said, no, I'm from engineering management, and my background is electronics and telecommunication. It was really surprising because he was really unaware of, and I saw his LinkedIn profile. It was around 12 to 15 years of experience in HR. And they never got back to me.
So many bad interviewers out there.
No,
There are so many bad interviewers. My heart breaks when I hear these stories. Yeah, that's
I
annoying.
did not expect that. I then texted the manager whom I spoke to with to get the interview.